Welcome back to another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God-given identity. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and I'm so grateful that you're here today. Today, we're going to be talking about the importance of sharing our stories. And you might be thinking, I don't have a story to tell, but I think you'll be convinced otherwise by the end of this episode. My guest today lived a hard life of childhood abuse, alcoholism, berating, and abandonment of sorts. Yet, through her trials, she learned the value of our individual stories. I want to start this episode off, though, with Psalm 147, verse 3, that says, He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. That's part of the reason I've asked Meg Glesener to be on the program, because she has experienced that and lives to tell her story. Meg is the host and producer of the Letters from Home podcast. Yes, she's a fellow podcaster, and that's how we met. And on her program, she publishes every other week for your enjoyment extraordinary faith stories. Her podcast can be found on Spotify, Amazon, Stitcher, and all the places that podcasts live. She and her husband, Mike, and their youngest 3 kids live and serve in Seattle, Washington. I hope that you'll welcome my friend, Meg. Welcome to the program, Meg.
Hello, Dr. Michelle. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad we share the love of podcasting and storytelling and inspiring others.
Oh, this is such a great avenue to be able to share the hope that we have found and to let people know they're not alone in their struggles. So often our passion comes out of our own hurts and trials. Meg, will you share a little bit about what your early childhood was like?
Yes. Well, some Christians, you see people at church, you just never know what kind of stories people have. And you think, oh, they must have been raised in a Christian home. Well, that wasn't my experience. I was raised in a home where faith wasn't a priority at all. There was a lot of abuse and brokenness. And my dad was a raging alcoholic and an atheist. And my parents got divorced early, and it was just kind of a topsy-turvy childhood with lots of different schools that we went to, a lot of brokenness, a lot of bad relationships. And, there was even sexual abuse in there. So, when that kind of stuff affects your heart in your lives and your family, you become very insecure. You have an angry alcoholic parent, your whole life is, what are their emotional state? Are they okay? And you can really become a people pleaser when you grow up because you're so in tune to other people's emotions and disappointments and stuff like that. So, yeah, my early childhood was full of a lot of brokenness and insecurity and loneliness. And now we have a new brother and sister. Now they're gone. You know, you just don't know where you fit in the world.
What you mentioned, I think, is so true. And that is when we go to church on Sunday morning, or some of us go on Saturday night, and you look around, you have no idea really what people have endured. You and your family are active serving the Lord, and to look at you, you would never know that any of that was part of your upbringing. And growing up with an atheist parent or parents, will you share then how you came to know the Lord? Because it kind of seems like you had all the bricks stacked up against you.
Yeah, there was a lot of bricks stacked up against me. And, in high school, I was very insecure and lonely. And I had this one really nice friend, but nobody would know. I was cute and I was in sports, and nobody would know. They probably think, oh, she's got it together. But there was just this loneliness and emptiness inside. And I remember once a friend of mine said, oh, you should come hang out with me and my friends. I was like, huh? She was in this group called Campus Life, which is a lot like Young Life. And I started hanging out with this nice group of people. And I went to a party one night, and it was just at this girlfriend's house. And I spent the night. And this fellow named Lance literally just opened up the Bible, read John 3:16, gathered a few people around, and he said, who wants to get saved? And like I said, there was this loneliness and emptiness inside. And I just think Ecclesiastes says that the Lord put eternity in our hearts, like we know we're made for more. And I just had that sense. And when he shared the gospel and said, who would like to give their life to Christ? With all my heart, I said, me, I do. And I had never been to church. I had never read the Bible before. And yet, kind of like an axe, when it says their hearts were pricked within them, I knew God was speaking to me, and I gave my life to Christ that very night in my friend's room. And I tell you, Dr. Michelle, when I woke up the next day, I just remember like the sun was shining, like there was light. It was a beautiful moment of salvation. So,
His light pierced your darkness.
absolutely.
I love that you came to know the Lord through campus life. I was really active in campus life when I was
Were
in
you?
school, and what an amazing ministry. Because Meg, I've been in mental health for decades, and I think we all struggle with loneliness and insecurity at different times in our life. And those who would tell you they don't, I'm not sure they're telling the truth, because we all experience it now and then. We are all created with a desire to be loved and accepted. And what an amazing place where you found that love and acceptance. But how did others react to your newfound belief?
Well, now that's the part where my story takes a bit of a turn. So, my dad was still, he did get sober when I was in high school, but that raging anger and alcohol, we were just also afraid of my dad. But anyway, in his atheism, I just like, hey, Dad, what do you think about God? I thought, I'll tell him I'm a Christian. And he was so angry. He said, I'm the one who puts the food on the table. I pay the rent. There is no room for God in my house. So
Yeah.
I just through my junior and senior year kept that inside. But then in college, and this is really crazy, but I got a full scholarship for sports for volleyball to Azusa Pacific. And my dad wouldn't let me go because it was a Christian college. So I ended up putting myself through college. And while I was going to Cal State Fullerton in Southern California, I met a group of Christians who invited me to church. And I thought, oh, well, let me tell my dad about that. So I said, Dad, hey, I'd like to go to church. And he got real stern and angry. And he was like, it's a bunch of propaganda. It's a bunch of BS. And I said, well, and I'm a Christian. And he said, I would rather you told me that you were on drugs than that you were a Christian. And he said, you can go once, but if you ask me to go again, I'm not welcome to live in my house. So,
Wait a minute.
and I went.
You can go once.
Yeah.
Then what did he say?
But if you want to go again, you're not welcome to live in my home.
Oh, Meg.
And I was a good kid. I was like the, good student. I was
Yeah.
the kid going to college, all that kind of stuff. My siblings were, yeah.
So it begs the question, how did you cope with that? With that ultimatum?
Well, I had been hiding the Bible in my room because I was afraid of my dad. So I just kind of, if I heard his footsteps walk by, quick hide the Bible in college. I was 17, hide it under my blanket or something. And I thought, I don't know if I want to still keep hiding my Bible. And I went to church, and Dr. Michelle, I couldn't believe it. Like, people are singing and praising God. It was such a great experience. I still church today all later. It makes me so happy to hear God's people singing. But it was such a beautiful experience. I thought I have to go. So I want to go again. So I told my dad, I said, Dad, and my stepmother was there. And I said, well, I want to talk to you about something. And they knew, they're like, what? And I said, well, I went to church and I decided I want to go again. And they said, well, you know what that means. And we were sitting down, they were looking right at me. And I said, yes, I know what that means. I was 17 years old. And my dad said, when are you leaving? And I said, it was a Monday. I said, I don't know. And my stepmother looked right at me and said, that's not good enough, Meg. We want a date. And I said, Wednesday. So I moved, and they wouldn't let me say goodbye to my sisters. And I was kicked out of the house for my faith, and then moved in with my mom and her boyfriend. So, and started growing my faith. But yeah, not your everyday story, but it's my story. It affected me so much.
And yet God lit such a light in you that you needed for that light to shine? When I think about the Christians around the world who have been persecuted, you've experienced some of that and lived to tell. Friends, we're going to take a real quick commercial break, but I want you to stick with us because Meg's going to share about how our life experiences shape our stories. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your Hope-Filled Perspective, where my guest today is friend Meg Glesener, and she's sharing about how our life experiences shape our stories. Meg, you've mentioned before, not on this podcast, but you've mentioned before that you had 7 out of 10 markers for ACE, ACE, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. Will you share how that shaped you?
When you're starting off in life, you don't know that it's not normal. You don't know that the yelling, the alcoholism, the divorce, sexual abuse. You don't know any of this stuff. It's part of your, my mom was married 4 times and I love her. She passed away a couple of years ago, but you don't know all this stuff isn't normal as a kid. But then you start realizing, oh my goodness, this stuff was really awful and it really affects you. But going back to all of that, I can just really see God's hand in my life because of all that. I was more fearful. So I didn't go down the route of promiscuity or drugs. I was too afraid to make a mistake. And so like I see God's story kind of writing another story in the midst of all of that hardship. And, when we went to college, I met my husband, Mike, and he loves Jesus and he wanted to serve the Lord. We got married right after college. And my dad wouldn't go to our wedding, because of all that. So it's hard to process all of that. You think, why did I get the parents that I got? What happened? And then because of all of that, it has made me hold on to the Lord more tightly.
Yeah.
And I have to say, through that process, the sisters I wasn't able to say goodbye to, 2 of them now know the Lord. One of them's married with kids. My mother got saved. My brother got saved. 2 of my brothers got saved. Now their whole families know the Lord. So just seeing this whole ripple effect in my family that God used through my hard story, and having a loving, kind husband where God worked a healing work for me, where I knew, oh, my husband's not mad at me and I did something wrong. I was just sure, oh no, the hammer's going to fall. No. And so when you learn about God's love and his healing and he starts to work in your heart, that love and acceptance and in purpose, it just gives you that deeper walk in perspective.
Oh, that just makes me cry. All the family members that came to know the Lord after you did. What if you had not been at that campus life meeting that night? But isn't it amazing to think that God placed you there for such a time as that and then worked within your family system? But Meg, as a neuropsychologist, I know that so often how we view God is based on what our relationship was like with our earthly parents. Was that ever a factor in your relationship with the Lord?
For sure. My father, I just kind of thought God was mad at me, so I had to do all the right things, or God was not going to be pleased with me, in just that kind of a way. And through being around God's people at church, finding people that you're around who inspire you and love you through, you just don't know what you're picking sometimes. When you have your husband, I knew he loved Jesus. I loved so much about him. And he has been the biggest example to me of God's love. So yes, that retraining in our mind to say, wait a second, God isn't that. God loves us. We are accepted in the beloved. What is it? We are accepted. We don't have to prove our love for him. We don't have to do works to be accepted. Yes, that's a huge process for and, communicate that to all of our kids too, recognizing those patterns there where it's like, oh, wait, I really need to keep my anger in check. I need to keep my heart in check and make sure I'm not communicating to the kids that they're only accepted based on their good or bad behavior, right?
Exactly. You've come to value the importance of other stories. You and I both share other stories on our podcast. How do you know when you're ready to tell your story?
When you're not reliving the pain of it, you're retelling it.
Mm,
So, when you feel that you've healed enough, so it's almost like I'm telling your story because it's something God has healed and worked in me. And Dr. Michelle, for me, it wasn't until a year ago when I really felt God say, you're ready. And I checked with each one of my kids because it involves personal stuff like sexual abuse. And I said, are you okay with it? And every single one of all 8 of the kids said, yes, mom, you have my blessing. This is what God wants. And so when you have that full surround, so yes, when you know that you're not just reliving the pain, if it's going back to those hard places, just puts you in a really difficult place. And it's okay to take time with that. Some of you out there are thinking, oh no, I'm not ready to put my story out there. And I remember the day when I put my story out there on Altered Stories podcast, and I was so nervous that night and the next day, but there was such a relief and joy. And being able to put that story out there, it didn't before, but it helped me say, that story doesn't hold any weight over me. The enemy can't use that to discourage me or say, oh, somebody's going to find out and think you're damaged goods. Oh, that's why Meg's like this because she had this. It's like the enemy wants to use our story against us. And you know what? No, I'm not going to let him do that because God God allowed some things that were completely out of my control so that he could bring this beautiful story. And I can't tell you how many podcasters and stories I've gotten to tell where that very thing that the enemy was trying to use for evil in someone's life, he has given them this incredible ministry of healing and hope.
I think that's what's so important is that recognizing that it's the enemy who wants to keep us silent. And when the secrets are kept in the dark, that's when they're the most powerful. But when
Mm,
we receive healing from the Lord and bring those secrets out into the light, the enemy loses his power. But it's a matter of where we're going to put our trust. Are we going to put our trust in the enemy and are concerned about what other people will think and say about our story? Or are we going to put our trust in the Lord who redeems?
yes.
Will you share just a little bit about how you've seen sharing stories on your podcast, Letters from Home? What are some of the ways that you have seen God use the telling of other stories on your show for their faith journey?
Great question, Dr. Michelle. For one, my son, it's my first episode. He is a very bright boy, loves Jesus, almost died in college, misdiagnosed, falsely misdiagnosed with a mental. They said he had a psychotic break and were medicating him to the point of not being able to converse. He was awarded the state. This is a kid who's been in theater, who's memorized so many books. So when he was walking around campus acting crazy because he had encephalitis, a brain infection, and he had to work through that. And I think him putting his story out there helped him again to see that it doesn't have power. It was really healing for him. I think of an episode I did 2 episodes ago. It was a trio. It was the DNA podcast, and three of the people, they have this great podcast. They do these live, and I did 3 mini testimonies. And one of the girls wrote me, and she said, Meg, I was crying when I heard that episode because when she saw all 3 of their names together and on this show, she said, I've never felt more like I was exactly where God wanted to be and that I know my purpose and calling. Just getting the story out there. has been so healing, so many. And it can be a blessing because, in the last episode I did, Jerry Dugan, he has the most warm, kind demeanor. You would not know that he witnessed his father attempting suicide, but it had got such a deep, beautiful work in him. And so for him, being able to share that, and there's tears right in the middle of the episode, and he's so vulnerable, but to go there, it just really gave him more confidence and power and trust, knowing that God is working in and through him.
I think one of the biggest ways that the enemy gets at us is to get us to isolate
Yes.
and to believe that we're alone and to believe that no one understands and to believe that no one cares. But for you and I, who share other people's stories and give them a platform to speak and share about what the Lord has done in their lives, Meg, don't you think that gives permission then to the next person and the next person to realize that,
Yes.
I'm not alone? And it gives them permission to open up and speak out. It's like planting a seed of courage.
Yes. It's like that seed of courage, and someone knowing, like you said, that they are not alone. And I think the whole Me Too movement was pretty helpful with that too. You're like, oh my goodness, these Hollywood stars that people look up to, and they seem so beautiful and lovely and together. And it's like, oh no, they had this whole awful situation and they're still fine and they're standing. And then when you add our stories, where we see even, a different layer where we have the Lord, and you see the Lord's perspective, we get just a tiny glimpse of what he's working out in heaven. But if we're just looking at our lives and all the negative stuff and get introspective, but if we can lift our eyes up and see God is weaving this beautiful quilt together, and we're just looking at some of those threads on the backside, we're not seeing like, oh, flip the quilt over. So storytelling helps us flip those quilts.
Oh, I love that. Friends, we're going to take a real short commercial break, but stick with us because I always end up with this podcast asking my guests to share their hope filled perspective. We'll ask Meg to do that when we return. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope filled perspective. Meg, before we get to my last question that I always ask every guest, I really want to ask you what storylines have impacted you the most with pain and with hope-filled transformations.
I would have to say one of the episodes that got me so much is Tanya, who was literally homeless at 12. She came home from middle school and her dad had moved out and left the house empty. And this was after some really difficult years before then, but she turned to prostitution and she had no other way to make money. She didn't know anything. She had been to 100 foster homes, and today she is a single mom who loves Jesus, and God met her like in somewhere. She was in the safe house and there's this giant Bible, and she just said, God, if you can do something for me. I see that over and over again where God can do miracles. And that is why I'm helping tell stories, because through every episode, you see something that seems impossible. To have her come out of that and be a joyful single mom who, even after a stint in jail, is giving back and ministering to others. God can do anything.
That is what we call beauty for ashes.
Yes.
So, Meg, if a listener is resonating either with your story from your upbringing and coming to know the Lord, or your encouragement for them to share their story, what hope-filled perspective would you offer to them today?
I think it's something to really pray about, pray about being healed. So first of all, walk through those parts. Don't be afraid to, let through some counseling, through loving friends, through personal times with the Lord in the scriptures, just to walk before and look at some of those really hard parts and ask for healing. And when you feel that you have gotten to that place where you're healed and you could tell it, then just really pray about, what does God want you to do? Are you ready to tell your story? How, when, where? Maybe it's just you and a couple of girlfriends over coffee, and that's where it sits. But um, there's such joy in lightening your load, and when it's shared with others, it is lightened. But it has to be the right timing, and maybe someday God will have you share it in a more public setting, maybe at a ladies retreat at your church, maybe in a Bible study. I went to a ladies retreat, and there was this older woman, and she was, well, older, but she was in her late 60s, but she talked about having an abortion. And do you know how many crying eyes there were in that room, and how many people and she sat there crying, and something that she did in her 20s that she regretted so much. God used it for healing and forgiveness. So, our story can be healing for us, but it could be healing for someone else as well. But it has to be the right timing and the right place. So
Meg, I think it's appropriate if we end this episode with the scripture that talks about God will comfort us in our trials, so that then we can in turn comfort others with the comfort that He has given us. That is, in essence, what you've been talking about this whole episode, about sharing our story. As God brings us from a place of brokenness to healing, as we share our story and what God has done, that will then encourage others to continue in their healing journey. And then perhaps they'll share their story and help the next person. It's what I call the ripple effect. And God is always
yes.
in the ripples. Meg, thank you so much for coming on your hope-filled perspective and sharing of your story, and encouraging my listeners today to share their story. Friends, I hope that you've taken what Meg has shared today to heart, to perhaps plant a seed of courage for you to be willing, with God's help, to share your story. Maybe, as Meg said, it's just with a friend or two over coffee. Maybe it's at church. Maybe it's with the clerk at Walmart. You never know how God is going to use our story to encourage someone else. As always, this has been your Hope-Filled Perspective. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson. Until we talk again next week, may you have a hope-filled week.